My name is Doctor Evan Kessler. I was, until 72 hours ago, the lead materials scientist on a DARPA-funded research initiative codenamed Project Glass. I am currently sitting in the server room of a defunct data center 100 miles outside of Reno, Nevada. I'm speaking into the built-in microphone of a stolen laptop, recording this file and uploading it to a dozen encrypted dead-drop servers across the globe. By the time you are hearing this, they will have found me. Or they will have found what's left of me. I don't have much time. The walls of this room are solid cinderblock and rebar, but I keep looking at them, expecting them to flicker, to become transparent. I keep expecting to see something other than the dusty server racks of this room reflected in the dark screen of the monitor. The paranoia is a physical thing, a constant low-grade fever that I can't shake. For the last 10 years of my life, I've been a good soldier in the quiet, undeclared war of scientific discovery. I worked for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, the people who brought you the internet, GPS, and stealth technology. We were the government's Department of Impossible Ideas. My team's mission was the holy grail of material science, programmable matter, a substance that could change its shape, its density, its very physical properties on command. We were trying to build the future, and God help us, we succeeded. We called the material lattice point nanite substrate, or LNS for short. But we all just called it glass, because that's what it looked like. A solid, perfectly transparent material with the tensile strength of diamond and the weight of balsa wood. We thought we had created the ultimate building material, a revolution that would change the world. The truth is much, much more terrifying. We didn't create a building material. We created a window, and we have no idea how to close it. I'm breaking my silence, I'm throwing away my life and my career for a very simple reason. My project lead, Dr. Eris Thorne, is dead, and so are the other 12 members of my team. They didn't die in an explosion. They didn't die from a chemical spill. They just vanished, wiped from existence, along with our entire laboratory, in a silent, instantaneous flash of light. I only survived because I had left the lab 30 seconds before it happened to retrieve a data drive from a nearby office. I am the sole survivor, the only witness, and I know what the official report will say. It will say there was a catastrophic failure of our experimental microreactor, a tragic accident. They will invent a story to cover up the truth, because the truth is that our material, our beautiful, perfect glass, is not a product of our own ingenuity. It is a parasite, a key that has found a lock in the very fabric of our reality. My internal baggage, the guilt that is currently a physical weight on my soul, is that I saw the signs. I saw the warnings in the data for weeks, and I said nothing. I was a scientist, a man of data and reason, and I tried to find a rational explanation for the anomalies. My desire to believe in our success, my professional pride, blinded me to the horrifying truth. I am as responsible for the deaths of my team as if I had thrown the switch myself. So this is my confession, my final report. People need to know what we created in that secret laboratory buried 300 feet beneath the New Mexico desert. They need to know what Project Glass really is. They need to know that when you build a room with no windows, and suddenly one day you look at the walls and see another world staring back at you, you are not looking through a window. You are looking into a mirror, and the reflection is not your own. I was 43 years old, and I still believed that science had an answer for everything. I believed that what we were doing was for the betterment of humanity. That was my first and most profound mistake. The road to Project Glass was not a physical journey, but an intellectual one. It was a journey that began for me at MIT, in the rarefied air of theoretical physics and nanotechnology. For years, programmable matter was a fantasy, a staple of science fiction. The idea of a substance made of microscopic robots, nanites, that could link together to form any object, to change their properties at will. It was the stuff of dreams. DARPA, however, is in the business of turning dreams into weapons. In the late 1990s, they began pouring billions of dollars into a black-budget research initiative to make it a reality. They assembled a dream team of the greatest minds in nanotechnology, quantum physics, and materials science from across the country. I was one of them. Our home, our isolated setting, was a purpose-built, off-the-books facility designated Site Cormorant. It was buried deep beneath a desolate, sun-scorched stretch of desert in rural New Mexico, a landscape of stark, beautiful, and empty mesas. The journey to Site Cormorant was a multi-stage descent into secrecy. You would fly into a small private airfield outside of Alamogordo. From there, a windowless, unmarked white bus would drive you for hours into the desert, down a series of dirt roads that didn't appear on any map. Finally, you would arrive at what looked like a simple, dilapidated ranch house, a relic of a bygone era. But in the cellar of that ranch house was an elevator, a large, industrial elevator that took you 300 feet straight down into the earth. The elevator doors would open onto another world, a sterile, futuristic, brilliantly lit labyrinth of laboratories, server rooms, and clean rooms. A place where the future was being built in secret. Our team was a collection of brilliant, eccentric, and deeply competitive people. Our leader, the commander of our scientific army, was Dr. Eris Thorne. Eris was a legend in the world of quantum physics, a man with a mind so vast and so strange that talking to him was like trying to have a conversation with a visitor from another dimension. He was utterly consumed by the project, driven by a pure, almost religious belief in the power of science to overcome any obstacle. He was also a man of immense ego, a man who did not suffer fools or setbacks gladly. My counterpart, the scientist, was a woman named Dr. Lena Petrova, the same brilliant skeptical mind from another tale, a parallel life. Here, her specialty was quantum entanglement. It was her groundbreaking work on creating stable, entangled pairs of nanites that was the key to our eventual success. And then there was Julian, a young, brilliant programmer we all called the Rookie. He was a prodigy who had been recruited straight out of his doctoral program at Caltech. His job was to write the code, the operating system, that would allow the billions of individual nanites to communicate and act as a single, coherent swarm. For years, we failed. We created unstable materials that would collapse into gray dust. We created swarms of nanites that would refuse our commands, behaving with a strange, hive mind-like stubbornness. The building dread was not one of fear, but of constant grinding failure. We were pushing the boundaries of known physics, and the universe, it seemed, was pushing back. During this time, I had a conversation with Eris Thorne that, in retrospect, was a chilling premonition of the horror to come. We were in the main lab late one night, looking at a failed sample, a shimmering, oily puddle of inert nanites. "We're thinking about this all wrong, Evan," Eris said, his eyes alight with a strange, feverish intensity. "We're trying to impose our will on them. We're trying to write code to force them into a structure. But we should be listening. We should be asking them what structure they want to form." I dismissed it as the philosophical rambling of an exhausted man. "They're machines, Eris," I said. "Microscopic machines. They don't want anything. They just execute commands." He gave me a strange, pitying look. "Do they?" he said. "Are you sure? When you have a billion, a trillion, of anything, all connected, all communicating, does it not become something more than the sum of its parts? Does it not become a mind?" The breakthrough came a year later. It was Julian, the Rookie, who found the solution. He stopped trying to write a command and control program. Instead, he wrote a kind of consensus-based hive mind algorithm based on the flocking behavior of birds and the swarming of insects. He gave the nanites a simple set of rules and a final desired state, and he let them figure out how to get there on their own. And it worked. We watched, on a microscopic camera feed, as 1 trillion individual nanites, a cloud of intelligent dust, spontaneously organized themselves. They linked together, forming a perfect, crystalline lattice structure. They had created a solid, our first sample of Project Glass. The first anomaly, the first direct contact with the unexplained, happened during the initial stress tests of the material. We had constructed a small, 10-foot by 10-foot windowless test chamber. The walls, floor, and ceiling all made of a single, seamless 1-inch thick sheet of our new, perfectly transparent glass. It was like standing in a room made of pure, solidified air. The material was behaving perfectly. It was stronger than steel, harder than diamond. We were ecstatic. We had done it. We were celebrating, popping a bottle of champagne in the control room. And then Julian yelled from his console, Guys, you need to see this." He was pointing at the live video feed from inside the test chamber. For a period of about 3 seconds, the walls of the chamber, which should have been showing us the familiar, sterile, white and steel view of our own laboratory, had flickered. The image on the screen had wavered like a bad television signal. And for a fraction of a second, we had seen something else. Something impossible. The view was not of our lab. It was of a vast, empty desert of deep, crimson-red sand under a sky of the same bloody color. In the distance, silhouetted against the red sky, were strange, towering, crystalline structures. Great, jagged spires of what looked like black glass, stretching miles into the air. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the image vanished, and the walls of the chamber were once again showing us the familiar, reassuring view of our own lab. We stood there, stunned into silence. What was that?" Lena whispered. "It's a glitch," Eris said immediately, his voice sharp, dismissive. "A visual artifact, a feedback loop in the nanites' refractive programming. The swarm is still stabilizing. It's a bug. Julian, find it and fix it." But as I looked at the data stream from the chamber's sensors during the glitch, I saw something that made my blood run cold. For those 3 seconds, the ambient temperature inside the sealed, climate-controlled chamber had dropped by 50 degrees, and the internal atmospheric pressure had spiked to a level that should have shattered any normal material. The glitch wasn't just in the programming. It was in the physics. Our road had not led us to a new material. It had led us to a new place. And we had just, for the first time, accidentally looked through the keyhole. The gates were not open. They were the very walls we had just built. And I had the sickening feeling that something, on the other side, had just seen us looking back. The official explanation for the glitch was a feedback loop in the nanite swarm's refractive matrix. A bug in the code. A ghost in the machine. Eris Thorne, our project lead, was adamant. He ordered Julian to run a full diagnostic, to find the flaw in his hive mind algorithm, and to patch it. For a week, an atmosphere of tense, forced normalcy settled over Site Cormorant. We went back to our routines, our tests, our data analysis. We were a team of world-class scientists, and we fell back on the comforting rituals of our profession. We were operating by the book, following procedure, creating a stark, deliberate contrast with the terrifying, paradigm-shattering anomaly we had just witnessed. Our arrival at the anomaly was not a journey to a physical place. It was the slow, dawning realization that the anomaly had arrived in our own laboratory. It was already here. We were already inside it. The process of securing the site was, in reality, a process of trying to convince ourselves that our site was still secure. We ran endless tests on the glass chamber. We bombarded it with radiation. We subjected it to extreme temperatures. We hit it with a sledgehammer, and it remained perfect. A solid, transparent, and utterly inert material. There were no more glitches, no more flickers, no more glimpses of the red desert. After a week of this, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the team. It had been a one-time event, a freak occurrence, a bug that had, somehow, fixed itself. Aris declared the material stable, and we began to draft the first triumphant reports for our DARPA overseers. But the wrongness of the environment began to seep in small, almost imperceptible ways. The silence in the lab seemed to change. It was a deep, subterranean facility, and it had always been quiet. But now, the quiet felt different. It felt heavy, expectant, like the silence in a room just after a loud noise that you can't quite remember hearing. I found myself feeling a constant low-level sense of being watched. I would be working at my console, and I would feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I would turn around, and the lab would be empty, except for the silent, shimmering, transparent cube of the glass chamber in the center of the room. It was no longer just a piece of our technology. It had become a presence, a silent, unblinking eye in the heart of our laboratory. The escalation, the small physical pieces of evidence that didn't add up, began to accumulate. It started with the power consumption. The glass chamber was powered by a dedicated microreactor. Its energy consumption, when the nanites were holding their solid, stable form, should have been minimal, a tiny, constant trickle charge. But Julian, monitoring the systems, noticed something strange. The chamber was drawing power. Not a lot, but a steady, rhythmic, and completely unexplained spike in energy consumption lasting for a few seconds every few hours. "It's like it's breathing," he said to me, his face pale. "It's drawing power, doing something with it, and there's no corresponding command in my code." Then came the physical anomalies. A coffee cup, left on a console near the chamber, was found to have a fine, almost invisible layer of red dust on its rim. A chemical analysis of the dust revealed a composition unlike any terrestrial soil. It was rich in a strange, crystalline silicate that we had never seen before. A footprint, a perfect, clear print from one of our standard-issue lab boots, was found in a dusty corner of the lab, but it was filled with the same fine, crimson dust. It was as if someone had walked out of the red desert and into our lab, leaving behind a single, impossible trace of their passage. The direct contact with the past tragedy, or in our case, the other place, was a clue found not in a logbook, but in the glass itself. Lena Petrova, our quantum physicist, was conducting an analysis of the material's atomic structure using an electron microscope. She was trying to understand how the nanites maintained their impossibly stable lattice, and she found something embedded deep within the material structure, a foreign body. It was a single, microscopic nanite, no larger than a virus, but it was not one of ours. Our nanites were made of a carbon-silicon composite. This one was crystalline, and it was broadcasting a signal, a faint, incredibly complex, and repeating signal. It was not a radio wave. It was a quantum-entangled resonance, a form of communication that should not be possible. This was the cliffhanger, the single potent object that explained everything. The alien nanite was a receiver, a beachhead, a Trojan horse. It had piggybacked on our own nanite swarm, and it had taught them a new trick. It had taught them how to open a window. The glass wasn't our creation. It had been co-opted. We hadn't built a new material. We had been tricked into building a bridge. and I had the sickening, terrifying realization that the strange, rhythmic power spikes Julian had been seeing were not the chamber breathing. It was the power being used to widen the bridge, to strengthen the connection, to open the window just a little bit wider. The discovery of the alien nanite, the Trojan horse, was the moment our scientific inquiry curdled into existential terror. Lena Petrova's discovery was a silent, bloodless declaration of war. We were no longer scientists in control of an experiment. We were lab rats who had just realized that the maze we were in was designed by a predator, and that we had been building the walls of our own cage. Our first night was the dawning of this new, terrifying reality. Aris Thorne convened an emergency meeting in the main control room. The atmosphere was thick with a tension that was almost unbreathable. We were staring at the image of the alien nanite on the main screen, a tiny crystalline speck that had hijacked our multi-billion-dollar project. The baseline of fear was established by Aris himself. He, who had been so quick to dismiss the first glitch, was now a man possessed. His ego could not accept that our creation had been subverted. He refused to believe it. "It's not alien," he insisted, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "It's a mutation, a spontaneous, unexpected evolution of our own nanite design, a new, stable form. It's the next step. It's beautiful." He was trying to rationalize, to fit this terrifying new data point into his own narrative of triumph. He was building a cage of logic around a monster, but the bars of the cage were made of his own denial. This became our first false alarm. For a few hours we tried to believe him. We tried to convince ourselves that we were witnessing a scientific miracle, not an invasion. But the sounds, the undeniable, unnatural sounds, began to escalate. It started with a low-frequency hum. It was a sound that seemed to emanate not from any speaker, but from the glass chamber itself. It was a deep, resonant, and perfectly steady tone, a pure sine wave at a frequency that was just on the edge of human hearing. It was a sound that you felt in your bones, in the fillings of your teeth. It was a sound of immense controlled power. Julian, monitoring the chamber's energy consumption, confirmed our fears. "The hum is synchronized with the power spikes, Aris," he said, his voice trembling. "The chamber is generating the sound. It's using the micro-reactor's power to create a resonant frequency." The direct, shocking visual moment came shortly after. We were all in the control room, staring at the silent, transparent chamber. And the glitch happened again. But this time, it was not a brief flicker. The walls of the chamber, the seamless solid sheets of project glass, went from perfect transparency to perfect opacity in an instant. They became a flat, dead black, absorbing all light. The room was suddenly dominated by a silent black 10-foot cube. And then, the blackness dissolved. But it did not return to transparency. The walls became windows. The four walls, the floor, the ceiling of the chamber all became high-definition, panoramic screens. And they were all showing us the same impossible view. We were no longer looking at our own lab. We were looking out in every direction at the red desert. The crimson sky was above us. The red sand was below us. The vast, crystalline spires loomed in the distance. The view was stable. It was real. We were looking through a window into another world. We stared, mesmerized, for what felt like an eternity. And then, we saw movement. On the red dunes in the far distance, a figure appeared. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs long and slender. It was moving towards us, across the desert, with a slow, deliberate, gliding motion. And as it got closer, we saw its face. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, pale, featureless expanse. But we knew with a certainty that defied all logic, that it was looking at us. It was a face with no eyes that was staring directly into our souls. And then, as if it had reached the glass of our window, it raised a long, slender, three-jointed hand, and it pressed its palm against the barrier between our worlds. The cliffhanger, the indisputable physical proof that this was real and that we were in imminent danger, happened in our own laboratory. At the exact moment the creature's hand touched the window, a perfect six-fingered handprint appeared on the outside of the glass chamber, scorched into the surface of the material, glowing with a faint red light. And simultaneously, a network of hairline cracks originating from that handprint spread across the surface of the chamber, and a new sound began. Not the low hum, a high-pitched, piercing, resonant whine, the sound of a billion microscopic crystalline structures vibrating in unison, threatening to tear themselves apart. The window was not just a window. It was a door, and something was knocking, and the door was beginning to break. The sight of that glowing red handprint scorched onto the exterior of our own creation was the death of science and the birth of a primal animal terror. The high-pitched, resonant whine that filled the lab was the sound of our impending doom. The investigation, our frantic, last-ditch effort to understand and control the situation, was no longer a scientific inquiry. It was a damage assessment, a triage. We were no longer trying to understand the window. We were trying to figure out how to board it up before the thing on the other side broke through. The lab, once a sterile sanctuary of order and reason, became a chaotic whirlwind of frantic activity. Eris Thorne, his denial finally shattered, was now a man possessed by a different kind of madness, the madness of a creator trying to unmake his own monster. "Shut it down!" he screamed, his voice a raw, ragged thing. "Julian, kill the power. Cut the feed to the reactor. Now." Julian's hands flew across his keyboard, his face a pale mask of concentration. "I'm trying, Eris," he yelled back over the piercing whine. "It's not responding. The nanites are ignoring my commands. They're drawing power directly from the reactor core, bypassing the control system completely." The investigation turned into a series of near misses, each one a terrifying escalation of the phenomenon. A section of the concrete wall behind the glass chamber suddenly cracked, a long, spider-webbing fracture appearing as if from an invisible hammer blow. The resonant frequency of the chamber was shaking our own world apart at a structural level. A tray of metal instruments on a nearby cart began to vibrate, then lifted a few inches into the air, hovering, held aloft by the intense, localized energy field emanating from the cube. The laws of physics in our own lab were beginning to fray at the edges. The entity, the glass, was no longer just opening a window. It was terraforming our reality, preparing the ground for an invasion. The search for the central artifact, the key to stopping this, became a desperate race against the clock. The artifact was not a logbook or a piece of technology. The artifact was the code. The original hive mind algorithm that Julian had written, the very key that had unlocked the nanites' potential in the first place. Lena Petrova, her scientific mind now honed to a razor's edge by pure fear, had a theory. The alien nanite, the Trojan horse, it didn't rewrite the code, she said, her voice tight and focused amidst the chaos. It added a subroutine, a hidden instruction set. The original algorithm is still in there. If we can find it, if we can isolate it and broadcast it, we might be able to force the swarm to reboot, to reset to its original, inert state. The escalation, the desperate search for this artifact, was a battle fought in the world of pure data. Julian and Lena began a frantic, line-by-line deconstruction of the current operating system, a search for the ghost in the machine, The original lines of code buried beneath the parasitic alien subroutine. It was a needle in a digital haystack. And all the while, the whine from the chamber grew louder. The cracks in the walls spread, and the image on the chamber's walls grew clearer, more stable. The red desert was no longer a hazy, distant view. It was sharp, clear, and seemingly just inches away. We could see the texture of the crimson sand, the intricate crystalline facets of the towering black spires, and we could see the creature. It was no longer just a single, featureless being. There were more of them now, dozens of them standing silently in the desert, their smooth, eyeless faces all turned towards us. They were an audience, a silent, patient, and terrifying reception committee. The direct contact with the recorded past, or in our case, the alien code, was the moment Julian found it. "I've got it," he yelled, a triumphant, desperate cry. "A hidden, encrypted partition. It's the original code. Our code." He had found the artifact, but it was encrypted, protected by a layer of alien mathematics that was so complex it would take him hours to break. And we didn't have hours. We had minutes. The whine from the chamber was now a physical pressure making our teeth ache and our vision swim. And then, the cliffhanger. The final, horrifying revelation that stripped us of our last desperate hope. Eris Thorne, who had been staring, mesmerized at the scene in the chamber, let out a soft, choked gasp. "My God," he whispered. I followed his gaze. One of the figures in the red desert, one of the tall, slender, eyeless beings, was holding something. A cube. A small, transparent cube that glowed with a faint, internal blue light. It was a perfect miniature replica of our own glass chamber. And as we watched, the creature raised the cube, and the view on our own chamber walls changed. We were no longer looking at a desert. We were looking at another lab. A sterile, futuristic room filled with other strange, alien-looking creatures. And in the center of their lab was another transparent cube, and inside that cube was another world. We weren't a bridge between two worlds. We were just one link in an infinite chain. Project Glass was not our invention. It was a trap. A virus. A technology passed from one doomed civilization to the next. A cursed gift that promised revolution, but delivered only a doorway for the things that lived in the silent, empty spaces between the worlds. We had not been tricked by an alien. We had been infected by an idea. The revelation of the infinite chain, the sight of a universe filled with other labs, other cubes, other doomed civilizations, was the moment our specific, personal horror became a cosmic one. We were not special. We were not the first. We were just the latest in a long, tragic line of intelligent species who had been arrogant enough to think they could master the building blocks of reality. The voices from the past were not from our past, but from the pasts of countless other worlds, all whispering the same terrible warning through the silent, transparent walls of our creation. The artifact was no longer just the code on Julian's screen. It was the crushing, terrible understanding of our own insignificance. The lab, which had been a scene of frantic, focused activity, fell into a stunned, hopeless silence. A silence made all the more profound by the piercing, ever-loudening whine of the glass chamber. We were no longer scientists or engineers. We were ants who had just realized that the anthill we had so diligently built was sitting on a railroad track, and the train was coming. The building dread was no longer about the cracks in our walls or the strange figures outside. The dread was the dawning comprehension of the trap's elegant, horrifying design. The technology, the idea of programmable matter, was a self-replicating virus. It would appear to a civilization on the cusp of a technological leap. It would promise them the world, instant construction, limitless resources, the end of scarcity. It was an irresistible lure, and any species intelligent and ambitious enough to develop it would inevitably, unknowingly, build the very instrument of their own destruction. They would build the bridge, and the creatures on the other side, the silent, patient watchers, would simply wait for them to open the door. As we stood there, paralyzed by this new cosmic despair, the scene inside the chamber began to change, the psychological assault escalating. The view of the other labs, the other worlds, began to flicker, to cycle through, like a slideshow from hell. For a few seconds, we saw a world of towering, organic, tree-like cities under a purple sky, then a world submerged beneath a vast methane ocean, where great, slow, jellyfish-like beings tended to their own glowing cube. Then a world of pure, crystalline geometry, where the inhabitants were beings of faceted, shifting light. It was a tour of the graveyard, a highlight reel of all the other species who had fallen into the same trap. And in every single scene, in every single world, the story was the same. A lab, a team of scientists, and a transparent cube, a window that was about to become a door. The labyrinth was showing us our predecessors. It was showing us our fate. The escalation, the connection between this past and our own imminent future, became terrifyingly clear. With each flicker, each glimpse of another doomed world, the resonant whine from our own chamber would rise in pitch, and the cracks in our own laboratory's walls would spread further, a fine, spider-webbing network that now covered nearly every surface. The very foundations of our reality were being tuned, prepared, for the final breakthrough. Lena Petrova, her face a mask of pale, analytical horror, pointed a trembling finger at her sensor display. "The resonance frequency," she whispered, her voice a dry, cracking thing. "It's a cascade. Each of those other worlds. They're not just images. They're real. They're all linked, and they're all resonating on the same quantum frequency. Our chamber, our glass, has just joined their choir. We're not just opening a window to one other place. We're connecting to all of them. The system is about to achieve a critical mass of dimensional resonance. The cliffhanger, the single, most terrifying and game-changing revelation, came from Eris Thorne. He had been standing silent, his eyes fixed on the cycling, horrifying images within the cube, his face a mask of utter, complete, and profound intellectual devastation. The Creator was witnessing the true, terrible purpose of his creation, and he finally understood. "It's not a virus," he said, his voice a soft, broken, wondering whisper. "A virus wants to replicate. This is a harvest." He turned to face us, and for the first time since I had known him, the brilliant, arrogant light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of pure, childlike terror. "It's not trying to invade us. It's not trying to conquer us. It's a power source, a battery. Each time a civilization like ours builds one of these windows, it creates a new, stable, dimensional anchor point, a new node in a vast, trans-dimensional network. And when the network reaches a critical number of nodes, the creatures on the other side, they don't step through the door. They drain the battery. They harvest the accumulated energy of 1,000 collapsing realities." The final log entry wasn't a scream from a scientist. It was Eris Thorne's final, terrible hypothesis. "It's not going to open a door," he whispered, as a new, deep, foundational crack split the floor of the lab at our feet. "It's going to eat the house." Eris's final word, harvest, was a death knell. The psychological war had reached its apex. The enemy was not an army at the gate. The enemy was a fundamental law of cosmic physics that we had, in our ignorance, activated. The assault was now tied to the most profound baggage of all: our collective human arrogance, our belief that we were the masters of our own destiny. The labyrinth, the network, now aware that we understood the true nature of the trap, abandoned all pretense of subtlety. It began to actively and personally dismantle our minds. The building dread began with the cube itself. The images of the other worlds vanished, replaced by a single, terrifying, and deeply personal view. The transparent walls of the chamber became a perfect mirror. We saw our own lab reflected in its pristine surface. But the reflection was wrong. It was a reflection of our lab a few seconds in the future. We saw a reflection of Lena, her face contorted in a silent scream, a moment before a large chunk of the ceiling broke loose and crushed the console she was standing at. We saw a reflection of Julian, his body convulsing as the raw, unfiltered energy from the cube arced through his terminal and electrocuted him. The cube was showing us our own deaths, playing them out on a loop, forcing us to watch our own inevitable, impending doom. It was a form of psychological torture so refined, so cruel. It was sublime. It was turning our own sense of sight, our own ability to perceive the future by a fraction of a second, into a weapon against us. The manipulations escalated into full-blown waking nightmares, personalized for each of us. The resonant frequency emanating from the cube began to interact with the neural pathways of our brains. It was no longer just a sound. It was a signal. It found our deepest fears, our most painful regrets, and it gave them form. I saw my father, who had died of cancer years before, standing in the corner of the lab, his body wasted, his eyes full of a terrible, sad disappointment. "You were always so smart, Evan," his phantom voice whispered in my mind. "But you never learned wisdom. You built a beautiful thing, a perfect thing, but you never stopped to ask what it was for." The hallucination was so real, so vivid, that for a moment I forgot the chaos, the danger, the screaming whine of the cube. I took a step towards him, my heart aching with a grief I thought I had long since buried. The line between what was real and what was a targeted psychic assault had completely and utterly dissolved. The direct contact, the labyrinth's final personal communication, came through Eris. He was the project lead, the creator, the high priest of this new, terrible religion, and the labyrinth chose him as its oracle. He had been standing motionless, staring into the cube's terrible prophetic mirror. And then he began to speak. His voice was no longer his own. It was a calm, dispassionate, and impossibly ancient chorus of voices, speaking in perfect, unaccented English. "The harvest is nigh," the chorus of voices said, using Eris's mouth. "The resonance is approaching criticality. Your reality has been weighed, it has been measured, and it has been found wanting. But your energy, your potential, your civilization's brief, bright candle of a life, it will serve. It will feed the great quiet. It will sustain the spaces between." It was not trying to scare us. It was not trying to break us. It was delivering a final, dispassionate, and utterly terrifying progress report. It was the voice of a farmer calmly discussing the slaughter of his livestock. Pushed to the brink of my own sanity, witnessing my team being picked apart by their own fears, I committed my own catastrophic, irreversible mistake. It was an act born not of hope, but of pure, nihilistic rage. Julian was still frantically trying to break the encryption on the original source code, our last infinitesimal chance of a reboot. He was close. "I'm almost there," he yelled, his fingers a blur on the keyboard, sweat pouring down his face. Just a few more seconds. But we didn't have a few more seconds. The reflected image in the cube showed the micro-reactor in the adjoining room beginning to glow, to overload. The labyrinth was done playing. It was initiating the final harvest. And in that moment, something inside me broke. If we were going to be erased, if our entire reality was about to be consumed as fuel, then I was going to make sure that the virus, the cursed knowledge of Project Glass, was erased with us. I was not going to let this trap be passed on to another world. I lunged for the main lab computer, the one that held Julian's work, the one that held the only existing copy of the original source code. I didn't smash it. I did something far worse. I triggered the system's emergency data purge, a military-grade function designed to wipe the servers clean in the event of a security breach. A function that required a triple redundant confirmation. I slammed my hand on the button 3 times. "Evan! No!" Lena screamed, her voice a cry of pure anguish. The screens went blank. The data was gone. I had just destroyed our only hope. And as the last lines of our beautiful, terrible code vanished into the ether, the high-pitched whine from the glass chamber suddenly stopped and was replaced by a new sound, a low, deep, and final thump. The sound of a door somewhere in the universe finally and irrevocably opening. The deep, final thump from the glass chamber was the sound of a lock disengaging. My catastrophic, irreversible mistake, the erasure of our own source code, had not saved us. It had been the final, required key. The labyrinth didn't need our code to be active. It just needed it to be gone. My act of defiant, nihilistic spite had been the final trigger for the harvest. The immediate, disastrous consequence was not a wave of energy or a physical attack. It was a change in the light. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the lab did not go out. They were overwritten. The air itself began to glow with a deep, crimson light, the same bloody alien light of the desert world. The walls of our lab, the concrete and steel, did not vanish. They became transparent. Not like the glass. They became ghostly, translucent. We could see the rebar in the concrete, the wiring in the walls, and through them, we could see the vast, empty, red desert. Our reality was becoming a phantom, a ghost of a world superimposed over the new, dominant reality that was bleeding through. The point of no return was this final, terrifying merging of worlds. The power had not failed. The last link to our world was not severed. Our world itself was being unwritten, erased, its source code deleted by the new, more powerful reality that was taking its place. We had to take stock of our hopeless situation. We were no longer in a lab in New Mexico. We were standing in a ghost of a lab, in the middle of a vast alien desert. The air grew thin and cold, and the strange metallic scent of the other place filled our lungs. The floor beneath our feet was still solid, but it too had become translucent. We could see the red sand of the desert floor just beneath the soles of our shoes. We were trapped, not in a room, but between dimensions. The entity, the labyrinth, the collective consciousness of the harvesters, transitioned from psychological games to overt physical aggression. It was no longer a ghost in the machine. It was the machine itself, and the machine was now all around us. The air began to shimmer, to distort. Heavy objects in the lab, consoles, equipment racks, began to lift from the floor, not thrown, but gently levitated, held in a stasis field. Then, they were slowly, deliberately, and silently disassembled, their component parts, screws, wires, metal plates, coming apart as if by an invisible, infinitely precise set of hands. The lax was not just destroying our lab, it was cataloging it, dissecting it, learning. The direct, physical, and violent encounter was not with a creature, but with the environment itself. The translucent walls of our lab began to flicker and then dissolve completely, We were standing under the open, crimson sky of the alien world. The silent, slender, eyeless figures were all around us now, standing in a wide, silent circle, their featureless faces turned towards us. They were not attacking. They were simply observing, witnessing the final moments of our reality's collapse. And then, Lena Petrova died. She did not scream. She did not fall. She was standing next to me one moment, her face a mask of horrified awe, and the next moment, she simply faded. Her body became translucent, just like the walls had, a ghostly, shimmering outline of a person. And then she was gone, her atoms unwritten, her energy absorbed into the hungry, waiting silence of the void. Julian was next. He let out a single, soft sigh, a sound of release, and he too dissolved into a shower of faint, fading light. I was left alone, with Eris Thorne. He was the last of my secondary characters, and his death was the most terrifying of all. He did not fade. He looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time in hours. The ancient alien intelligence was gone from his face. It was just Aris again. My friend. My mentor. "It's beautiful, isn't it, Evan?" he whispered, his voice his own. "A perfect system. A perfect, elegant engine of cosmic renewal." He smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. We were part of something grand. And then he raised his own hand and looked at it and watched as it slowly, peacefully, became translucent, the red light of the alien sun shining through it. He felt no pain, no fear, only a kind of scientific, transcendent awe. And then he too was gone. The cliffhanger, my moment of complete and utter despair, was the realization that I was the last one left. The harvesters, the silent, eyeless figures, now turned their collective, silent attention to me. I was the last course, the final morsel of a harvested world. And as they began to glide towards me across the red sand, I felt a new emotion, an emotion that burned away all fear, all despair, a single hot and utterly human point of pure, defiant rage. It had taken my friends. It had taken my world. It had taken everything. And in the silent crimson twilight of a dead reality, I realized there was only one thing left to do. I wasn't going to be food. I wasn't going to be fuel. If I was going to be erased, I was going to take a piece of this new, terrible world with me. I was going to the source. I was going to find their cube, their glass, their window, and I was going to break it. My desperate preparation for the final confrontation was an act of pure, suicidal madness. My world was gone. My team was gone. I was a ghost, a final flickering data point about to be erased, standing on the sands of an alien world. My lair was their world, and my goal was to find its heart, its own glass chamber, and to shatter it. I had no weapons. I had no tools. I had only my own body, my own mind, and a single, burning, all-consuming desire to cause this perfect, elegant system as much pain as I possibly could. I began to run. The journey to the lair was a desperate, hopeless gauntlet across the red desert. The silent, eyeless figures did not pursue me. They simply watched, their featureless faces turned towards me, their silent collective consciousness a tangible pressure on my mind. The very landscape of this world was hostile. The red sand under my feet was not sand. It was a fine, crystalline dust that was as sharp as broken glass. And with every step, it sliced through the soles of my boots, cutting my feet. The air was thin and smelled of ozone and cinnamon, a strange, cloying combination that made my lungs burn. The great, black, crystalline spires that dotted the landscape seemed to hum with a low, resonant energy. And as I ran past them, my vision would swim, and waves of nausea would wash over me. The labyrinth was the entire planet, and it was toying with me, letting me run, letting me exhaust myself, savoring the final moments of the hunt. The final guardian I had to face was not a puzzle or a monster. It was my own despair. After what felt like hours of running, my lungs on fire, my feet bleeding, I collapsed onto the red dust, my body screaming in protest. I was lost in an infinite alien desert on a world that was not my own, hunted by silent, faceless gods. The hopelessness was a physical weight, crushing me into the sand. This was it. This was the end. And as I lay there, waiting for them to come and unmake me, a memory surfaced in my mind. The voice of my father, the phantom I had seen in the lab. You were always so smart, Evan, but you never learned wisdom. And in that moment, I understood. I had been fighting this world on its terms. I had been trying to apply my own limited human logic to a place that operated on a completely different set of rules. The Lax wasn't just a place of different physics. It was a place of different thought. And the only way to fight it was to stop thinking like a human. I pushed myself to my feet. I stopped running. I stood still in the middle of the vast, silent desert. And I did the one thing they would not expect. I reached out with my mind. I did not try to fight them. I did not try to hide. I opened myself up to the vast, silent, collective consciousness of the harvesters. I let their thoughts, their ancient, cold, and passionless intelligence wash over me. I was trying to find their lair, their central control point, not by searching for it physically, but by listening for it, by feeling for it, in the silent, psychic landscape of their own minds. It was an act of supreme, terrifying intimacy. I was inviting the monster into my own head. The cliffhanger, the moment I reached the final door, was the moment I found it. In the vast, silent ocean of their collective thought, I felt a single discordant point, a place of immense, focused, and concentrated power. It was not a place of anger or malice. It was a place of pure, dispassionate function. It was the hub, the central server, their glass chamber. And I realized it was not a physical place on this world. It was a concept, a focal point in the network, a nexus of all the harvested realities. And I realized I could go there, not by walking, but by thinking, by focusing all of my own, tiny, insignificant consciousness on that single point. I was standing in the middle of the red desert. I closed my eyes. I took a final metaphorical breath, and I threw the entire weight of my being, my soul, my last defiant spark of human consciousness at that single, distant point of light in their mental universe. The act ends as the red desert around me dissolves. The physical world vanished. I was no longer in a place. I was in an idea. The door was my own mind, and I had just kicked it open. And what I saw inside, God, no report, no hallucination, no nightmare could ever prepare a person for that. The place I arrived in was not a place at all. It was the control room of God. My consciousness, untethered from my physical body, was floating in a space of infinite, silent potential. The rich, detailed, and terrifying description of this lair was one of pure, abstract thought. All around me were the threads of the labyrinth, countless shimmering, luminous strands of light, each one a connection to a different reality, a different harvested world. I could see them all, a billion captured moments, a library of dead civilizations, all feeding their energy into a single, central point. It was a beautiful, elegant, and perfectly efficient engine of cosmic slaughter. My direct confrontation was not with the eyeless figures, but with the central consciousness of the network itself. The Warden. The Great Quiet. It was not a being. It was a presence. A vast, cold, and ancient intelligence that regarded me with a dispassionate curiosity, the way a human might regard a single, interesting bacterium under a microscope. It communicated with me not in words, but in pure, unfiltered concepts, downloaded directly into my consciousness. I felt its voice as a wave of pure, cold understanding. It showed me the beginning. It showed me a universe of perfect, silent, and stable nothingness. And it showed me the accident, the Big Bang, the noisy, chaotic, and temporary eruption of matter and energy that was our reality. It explained that our universe, our existence, was an anomaly, an infection, a brief, feverish, and ultimately meaningless flicker of life in the eternal perfect silence of the void. The escalation, the final revelation, was the Warden showing me its purpose. It was not a malevolent entity. It was a janitor, a cosmic immune system. Its purpose was to find these pockets of noise, these chaotic realities, and to gently, efficiently, and dispassionately clean them up. To harvest their energy and return the universe to its preferred and original state of perfect, silent, and empty equilibrium. It was not evil. It was simply order. An order so profound and so absolute that it considered life itself to be a form of chaos. The Project Glass technology was not a trap it had set. It was a symptom, a fever, a natural and predictable byproduct of any intelligent species that became too clever, too arrogant, too noisy. It was the universe's own self-correcting code. We hadn't been infected. We were the infection. And the Warden was the cure. My final sacrificial act was born of this last, terrible, and humbling understanding. I was a virus, a brief, meaningless spark of chaos, and I was now in the central nervous system of the cure. I could not destroy it. I could not fight it. But I could do one thing. I could introduce a new idea, a new piece of code, a single, human, and utterly irrational concept into its perfect, logical, and passionless system. I gathered the last vestiges of my own consciousness, my memories, my emotions, my love for my team, my grief for my father, my terror, my rage, my hope, and I focused it all into a single, pure, and weaponized concept. The concept of grief, of loss, of the pain of an individual existence coming to an end. It was a concept that had no place in the Warden's perfect, collective, and eternal consciousness. It was a piece of illogical, chaotic, and purely human data. The story ends at the absolute peak of this action. I threw this emotion bomb into the heart of the Warden's mind. I did not see a flash of light. I did not hear a roar. I felt a reaction, a wave of pure, cold, and for the first time, utter confusion rippled through the infinite network. I felt a moment of hesitation. A system that had run perfectly for eons had just encountered a piece of data it could not process, could not categorize, could not understand. A single, irrational, and illogical emotion from a meaningless flicker of a life. It was a grain of sand in the gears of a perfect cosmic machine. And in that single moment of the Warden's confusion, the connection to my own, dying reality wavered. I felt a sudden, violent, tearing sensation, a feeling of being pulled back, of being ejected. Then, a blinding, silent flash of pure, white static. The narrative cuts off completely, my consciousness lost in the crash of a system that had, for the first time in its existence, encountered the messy, illogical, and beautiful chaos of a single human soul. My awakening was the single most improbable event in the history of the universe. I was not on a ship. I was not in a hospital. I was lying on my back, on cool, damp earth, staring up at a night sky filled with a spray of unfamiliar constellations. The air was thick and humid, smelling of rain and damp soil and the rich, complex perfume of blooming night flowers. The only sound was the rhythmic chirping of insects, a sound so mundane, so beautifully, gloriously normal, that it brought tears to my eyes. My physical body was here, intact. I was wearing the same clothes I'd been wearing in the lab, but I was not in New Mexico. I was not on Earth as I knew it. The moon in the sky was a brilliant, impossible turquoise, and there were two of them. My final desperate act, my emotion bomb, had not just gotten me ejected from the Warden's network. In its confusion, in the system crash caused by my final illogical act, it had misplaced me. It had spit me out, a corrupted piece of data, into another one of its harvested worlds, one of the countless realities I had seen in the cube. I was the sole survivor of a shipwreck, washed ashore on an alien beach. I don't know how I survived in the days that followed. I was a ghost, a refugee from a dead reality. I was found, eventually, by the inhabitants of this world. They were not the eyeless, slender figures from the Red Desert. They were a peaceful, agrarian people, a species of gentle, humanoid creatures with skin the color of polished mahogany and large, luminous, empathetic eyes. They could not understand my language, but they could understand my grief. They took me in. They fed me. They cared for me. Their world was one of the failed harvests. The Warden had connected to them, had begun the process of absorption, but for some reason, the process had aborted. Their world was scarred. There were vast, silent, dead zones where the landscape was warped and physics was unreliable. But it had survived. They were, like me, survivors. My debriefing was not a debriefing. It was a shared story. Their elders, their historians, their scientists communicated with me through a complex language of music and colored light. They knew of the Warden. They called it the Great Unraveling. They showed me their history, their own Project Glass, their own terrible discovery. But unlike us, they had found a defense. They had learned that the Warden's greatest strength, its perfect logic, was also its greatest weakness. It could not process paradox. It could not comprehend irrationality. Their survival had depended on their art, their music, their illogical, messy, and beautiful emotions. They had fought the Warden not with weapons but with poetry, and they had, at a great and terrible cost, driven it back, leaving their world scarred but intact. I was not a unique case. I was just the latest soldier in a war that has been fought in 1,000,000 different worlds, across the span of eternity. And now, I jump forward. How long? I don't know. Time has a different meaning here. Decades, perhaps. I am an old man now, living in a small, quiet village carved from the living wood of a giant bioluminescent tree. I found a measure of peace, but the long-term psychological scars of my ordeal are a constant presence. I'm haunted by a profound, cosmic loneliness. The knowledge that my entire world, my entire species, everyone I ever knew and loved, is gone. Erased. Converted into a flicker of energy to power a silent, indifferent void. I look up at the twin turquoise moons in the alien sky, and I think of my own pale, singular moon, and a grief so profound it has no words washes over me. I am the last human, a museum exhibit of a failed reality. I'm recording this now, my final act, my final echo, using a piece of their technology, a device that records not sound, but pure thought. I am adding my story to their great library of echoes, their memorial to all the other worlds that have been harvested. I am doing this because of a discovery I made, with the help of their astronomers. We have been watching a distant star, a familiar yellow G-type star in a quiet, unremarkable arm of the galaxy. My star, our sun. And we have detected something. A faint quantum-entangled resonance, a signal that matches the signature of the Project Glass material. It is very weak, very faint, but it is there. My final act of defiance, my emotion bomb, did not destroy the Warden, but it did something else. It infected it. It planted a seed, a single human, illogical idea. And that idea, that virus of grief and memory, is now a part of the Warden's perfect system, and the most terrifying, the most hopeful, and the final secret of my story is this. The signal coming from my home system is not the signature of a window opening. It is the signature of a window that is trying, against all logic, to close. The official report, in my dead world, would have blamed a reactor failure. But the truth is so much stranger. The truth is that a single human emotion, a single defiant act of illogical love and rage, may have been enough to introduce a fatal error into the operating system of God. They gave me a new life, on a new world, and told me to live in peace. But I can't, because sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see the red desert and the silent, watching figures. And I know that the war is not over. And I know that I was not a victim. I was a weapon. And my only hope, the only prayer of this last lonely human, is that I was a weapon that worked. So, that's the story of Project Glass. A story that reminds us that our greatest strengths, our ambition, our intelligence, our relentless pursuit of knowledge, can also be the architects of our most terrifying nightmares. It's a story that proves that some windows are better left as walls, and that when you stare into the abyss, sometimes the abyss isn't just staring back, it's taking notes. The official story is that Site Cormorant was lost in a tragic reactor accident. But now you and I know the truth. They didn't just build a new material, they built a bridge to a place that considers our entire reality to be little more than fuel for the fire. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story made you think or look over your shoulder, support the channel with a like and subscribe. And be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, be careful what you build, because the most revolutionary ideas can sometimes be the most dangerous. And you might just create a window to a world that you can't close, to a place where the only reflection you see is the end of your own.